the academic life of Great Hearts Irving Upper School. I'm the chair of today's panel, Mr. Mooney. We are pleased to have Ms. Bhatia with us today to offer her defense of her senior thesis. Before we begin, we ask that all members of the audience, in respect for the work that Ms. Bhatia has done this year, to please remain in the room for the duration of the defense, which will last approximately 1 hour. Please take this opportunity to silence all cell phones as well. The defense will be broken up into the following parts. For the first 5 to 10 minutes, Ms. Bhatia will give a summary of her work. That'll be followed by a few minutes of opening remarks and maybe a question or two from myself, the chair. Then we will go to the advisor, Mr. Turner, for 10 minutes of questions, and then to the reader, Mr. Stindy, for 10 minutes of questions. It'll come back to me for 10 minutes of questions. And then at that point, it will be opened up to the audience for 10 minutes of questions. So as we continue through the defense, be thinking of things you might want to ask. At this point, the panel will recognize the advisor, Mr. Turner.
Can I go ahead?
Present from here.
Oh, from the...
Yeah.
Hello. I present Ms. Bhatia, author of Finding Humanity in the Carnage of War, The Quiet Heroism of Stanislaus Kaczynski.
Yeah.
Here today to offer a defense of her work and partial fulfillment of Great Hearts Irving's graduation.
Woo! Big crowd. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stindy, Mr. Mooney, and Mr. Turner. Mr. Can you tell I'm a little nervous?
Not at all. You're doing great.
Thank you, Mr. Turner, for being on my panel. And thank you all for coming to support. Most of all, though, thank you to my family for being the sounding board as I wrote and rewrote this paper. And of course, Mew, thank you for being my editor. Tension, tension, tension. Mr. Mooney asks us, where is the tension? We are tasked to find the fundamentally confusing aspect of our work and then to make sense of it. We need to solve the puzzle. But how do you find the puzzle? After floundering around for a bit, I realized that the tension lies in the very reason I chose to study All Quiet on the Western Front. I chose this book simply because in this tragic, gut-wrenching novel, there are some raw and beautiful descriptions. However, most of them are horrifying. Paul tells us that the front turns men into thugs, into murderers, into God only knows what devils. If your own father came over with the enemy, you would not hesitate to fling a bomb at him. This is war. This primal instinct, almost a primal rage, is far more dependable than the human ration and emotion. On the front, if you think, if you feel, you are dead. So the men must become animals to survive. Curiously, though, there are many scenes where the men seem especially humane. Paul strikes a French soldier out of this instinct, but then he tries to save the soldier. Puzzling, huh? In the carnage of war, how is there humanity? What, or rather who, is able to combat this destructive nature of war? At first I was like, the answer is love. I know, right? How profound. That's a joke. It's not profound because unless you can define what is love, it tells you absolutely nothing. Then I floated around brotherhood, camaraderie, maybe shared trauma. That's how Paul retains his humanity. No. I realized there is one person whose very being opposes the dehumanizing aspect of war. Stanislaus Kaczynski. First, war fully alienates Paul from his family. So then, Kat becomes Paul's brother, mother, father, and is even compared to a sort of lover of Paul's. We can get into that later. Then, many figures on the front abuse their authority because they are disconnected from reality they fail to meet the needs of the soldiers. Cat, surprise, surprise, contrasts all these figures. Ginger withholds rations from the soldiers, while Cat continually scavenges and provides for them. Cat is practical and focuses on staying alive, while Cantoric pressures young men into enlisting prematurely. Now, it seems that everything is going great, right? Cat is shielding Paul, opposing the destructive effects of war. Paul is beginning to find purpose in camaraderie, and there are even murmurs of peace. But there's a little something missing. I've explained how Cat opposes war, but where is the evidence, like the final nail in the coffin, that this is what causes Paul to retain his humanity? Here's what I've got. When Cat exists, Paul is humane, but when Cat ceases to exist, when Cat dies, Paul loses his humanity. When Cat dies, in a kind of senseless way, camaraderie vanishes, and Paul loses hope. It seemed that Cat was enough to keep Paul's humanity alive, enough to give him a sense of purpose, but when Cat dies, Paul also wants to die, underscoring Remarque's grand claim that war is a tragedy, that you cannot win against war, that there is no happy ending. Leaving a couple things for us to ponder. Is Remarque right? Is there really no way Paul could have found an everlasting purpose and meaning in his suffering, or was he really doomed to begin with? We will see. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Bhatia, for that excellent summary. And thanks for all your work this year, your work on finding the tension. I really appreciate that. And I think you outlined it really well, and it is really a striking aspect of this book, that contrast, right? Paul, and you mentioned this in your paper and in your speech, war turns us into animals, right? I've never heard an animal write so beautifully as Paul does. So how is that possible? And so thanks for taking up that real and fundamental tension in the book. Okay, well, I think I'll just ask maybe one or two questions here, and then we'll pass it off to Mr. Turner. So this is just sort of a way of setting the discussion up here, because you use the word humanity a lot. You talk about Paul retaining his humanity or losing it. And so I was wondering if you could just say a few words about what you mean by humanity. What counts as losing your humanity? What counts as keeping it? Are there any telltale signs that someone's lost their humanity? So, what do you think about that?
Yeah. So I think at the most basic level, right? Humanity, like what makes you human is your humanity, and like Aristotle says this, Plato says this, but it is really our like ration that differentiates beast from man. And in war, war makes like these men animalistic or anti-human, because they're asked to suppress this sort of ration. If you see like a shell coming towards you and you think, oh, what should I do? Then like Paul says, you are dead, right? You have to suppress this like intellect so that you can purely rely on instinct. So I think intellect is like, to be humane, you have to be exercising your intellect. Another thing is like emotion. Emotion is something that differentiates human from beast. And again, on the front, if they feel too deeply, if they kind of realize the horror of what they're going through, they go crazy. Like Dietering and the cherry blossom, he let something remind him of home, and so he went mad, right? He tried to escape and was eventually found and killed. But I think it's ration, I think it's emotion, And I think the last one is free will, where the soldiers don't get to choose what their day-to-day looks like. Like, sure, they're choosing to obey, and that is an exercise of free will, but they're not choosing how they live. That's chosen by like the figures of authority, which they don't choose. They're not choosing who their corporal or like the platoon leader is. So I think I would sum it up in like intellect, emotion, and free will.
Great. Thanks for the full answer. I think we're ready to get started. Mr. Turner.
Great. Ms. Bhatia,
Mr. Turner.
well done.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. This was my first time to read the book, and I really enjoyed getting to read it and discuss it with you. I think one of the things that I most enjoyed was how thorough you were both in your reading and in your annotations and questions that you had for our discussions. Great job. In humanity, is war inhuman or inhumane? I remember one of our first conversations really revolved around that, and I'm so glad that you brought that back up and that you spent so much time on it in your work. One of the things that you talked about in your paper was the role of Cat as kind of this new family for him. And I was wondering, do you think in the book there's any evidence, or what do you think about the difference between the role of the family as the lifelong nurture for Paul, right? All of his life was raised by his parents, right? And now here he is. What's the difference, I guess, is the best way to put it. What's the difference between the role that the parents and the family have in the lifelong raising of him, and now all of a sudden Cat steps in? This is the first time that he's met, that he knows of Cat, right? Or I guess, maybe he knew him in training. My question is it the war that really breaks away the family and makes this opportunity for Cat to step in? Can you speak a little bit to that? What do you think?
Yeah, so is war what alienates Paul from his family?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is. So when Paul goes on leave, I think is like the clearest example of this. He says, oh, there's a distance between my family and I. He describes it as like a veil. And there are a couple ways that this shows up in the text. And I think the first part is his father, right? His father, he doesn't really try to connect with Paul. Paul almost describes it as like this curious in a way that I find stupid and distressing. That's what he calls it, because Paul's father has this like idealized version of a soldier. He sees Paul as like a soldier that he wants to hear the stories of war from rather than his own son. So there's a disconnect there. And then with his mother tries to kind of understand his suffering, but Paul doesn't let her. He's like, it's too much for you to handle, and he tells his mom, oh, I want to just like go in your lap and weep. And he wants that connection, but because his mother hasn't experienced it, Paul doesn't feel like he can place the burden on her. So that's what like disconnects him from his family, from his father, because there's like that weird, like romanticized version of war, and from his mother because he won't let her understand his suffering.
I think you're right. War has, I think from my reading of the book and our discussions, war has this way of driving that wedge between, right, the foundation of kind of like your reality, right? Your family is in a large way your foundation. They're there for so many formative years. I remember this moment early on in the book. We enjoyed. I think it's page 13. I don't know if you want. I can describe it, where Paul describes the moment of restored innocence, right? So the public latrine, war, and in particular the battle encampments provide this kind of bizarre idea where you strip away all of kind of our modern I don't know, social constructs in a way. Do you think that and some of the other stories that take place when they're not at the front but kind of already up there, that remark is suggesting that these are kind of an unexpected opportunity for the men to experience like an opportunity to restore humanity in this kind of like liminal space, like in between, not quite home, shipped out, but not quite on the front line. What do you think of that?
Run back that last part.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you think either on your own, or would you say, either from your own thoughts or from Mark, that he is suggesting that there's an unexpected opportunity in those in-between spaces for the men among the inhumanity of war to actually be restored?
Yes, I understand. Okay. I think there is a lot of opportunity for that, and I think that that's what, like, how Kat serves as a counterpart is like in these spaces where I'm so glad you brought up the latrine situation over there, because Paul says, right, we feel ourselves for the time being better off than in any palatial white tiled convenience. There it can only be hygienic, here it is beautiful. So this like act of relieving yourself, normally we think of it as like disgusting and, you know, smelly and yucky, but over there they make something beautiful out of it. And I remember like our first conversation was, we talked about like the Garden of Eden, that at the beginning when there was like no clothes, there was like an innocence to that only was stripped away when like sin was introduced. And so over here they're almost returning to that even though it's so horrible in war, because they can sit in a circle and defecate together, it's all good. Like they're growing in camaraderie, they're growing in brotherhood because of that.
I think so. I think there's something kind of hilariously deeper into humanity to kind of strip away our shames and just be human, like it's a human necessity, right? And we can get together, or they can get together as brethren and do what's needed. Go next. You, I think in your summary, started to touch on this, so I'll go here next. On page 70, they're having a discussion. Boys are sitting around, and turn it real quick. They're discussing what if, right? From somewhere or other, probably this is that top paragraph there. Probably the Pioneer Cookhouse Crop has bagged for himself a mess tin full of beans. You squints hungrily into it, protects himself and says, "Albert, what would you do if it were suddenly peacetime again?" "There won't be any peacetime," says Albert bluntly. "Well, but if," persists Mom, "what would you do?" "Clear out of this, of course, and then what? Get drunk. Don't talk rot. I mean seriously." "So do I," says Crop. "What else should a man do?" It's kind of a dark idea, right? If like one, it's not ever gonna be resolved. And if it does ever get resolved, life is gonna be just so unbearable that to get drunk and waste away is the only opportunity. What do you think of that? What do you think he has to say? I think you were starting to say something. Did you say more?
Yeah. So, at the beginning, Paul says like at the beginning of this narrative, Paul seems to completely lack purpose, right? He says it's 24 for us, 23 to 24. Kentoric would say that we stood on the threshold of life, and so it would seem we had as yet taken no root. The war swept us away. So Paul kind of begins this story without anything like holding him down. He hasn't taken root in anything because he's in like that liminal space where Paul describes it as like the effect of our parents was at its weakest, but we were too young for girls to have really have taken a hold on us yet, right? They're really just in the middle, that like 18 to 19. And so he starts off with no purpose. And then he begins to find a purpose in camaraderie. He says, where is it? Yes, page 182, he says, I am no longer a shuddering speck of existence alone in the darkness. I belong to them and they to me. We all share the same fear and the same life. We are nearer than lovers in a simpler and harder way. So he goes from having no purpose, being stuck in this liminal space, to camaraderie being his purpose. He says like, oh, I am someone because I am a comrade. But the issue with that is when the war is over, your comrades, there's no one left. Like literally every single one of them has died. So when you say, oh, I am someone because I am a comrade, that extends into when I am not a comrade, I am no one. And so I think that's what is like, that's what makes this so tragic, is that at the end, they have no purpose, they have nothing they're rooted in. It's just, like now he's just floating. And like when he says, he dies with a smile, right? That's why he dies with a smile, because there's nothing worth living for anymore. Sad.
That's very sad.
Yeah.
That's very sad. Oh man, I did not do a very good job of paying attention.
You're right on time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then
Thanks.
I'll pass it. Thank you so much, Ms. Bhatia.
Thank you.
Well, on that positive note, then I'll. First, I just want to commend you for such an excellent paper here, Ms. Bhatia. As you know, I advised this book as well this year, so I've grown to love it alongside you, but maybe in parallel, we didn't really have discussions. And it just, not really a question for you, just a statement of like, what an excellent choice of book that you've made, because I read this year and you drew out so many beautiful things from it that I didn't see the first time around, and so just what a gift of a great book that we can all pull so many great things from it. One of the questions that I want to start off with, because as I'm reading this, I'm seeing all these scenes and I go, oh, but what about this? And so you are framing Paul and Kat's relationship, and I've got other questions on that relationship in particular, but in the back of my mind as I'm reading this, I'm going, but what about Albert? Because that is a really key relationship that Paul has. Albert Kropp, however you want to call him, first or last name.
Yeah.
There's something there that does, I think, benefit Paul, like Kat's relationship to him does as well. So how do you think Paul's relationship with Albert helps preserve his humanity, or does it at all?
I think that it does. Now let me think of why. Okay, I'm just gonna start talking and let's hope something comes from it.
Yeah.
So Albert and Kropp, they're together at the hospital, right? They kind of go through sickness together. Paul like pretends to have a fever to stay with him. Now, how does that help them retain their humanity? I think one interesting part of their experience is that, like in the Catholic hospital, the nuns are like actually care for them. It says that like civilians are normally detached and they treat the soldiers as sort of icons, but the nuns they serve Albert and Paul like genuinely. So maybe because they're like in an environment where the outside seems to be more like the inside, that is a way that they like share an experience where their humanity is sort of restored because other people are seeming more humane. But it still doesn't directly answer your question because like that's the nuns, that's not Albert. Let's see. Albert does almost show like envy towards Paul when they're in the hospital and Paul is able to like move out of his bed and play scat and move around, and Albert is kind of like distant, just watching with sort of like a solemn expression on his face. And maybe that's a way that humanity is restored. Like on the front, there's no like real opportunity to be jealous, and we don't see envy before that. But when they're together in the hospital, there are like glimpses of normal human behavior. And maybe that's why.
Yeah. I think of as well that moment in the hospital where they get to kind of deceive the nuns a little bit so that one of the fellow men can see his wife while they're in there. And there's something about that bond of mischievous behavior that harkens back to maybe some of that more innocent time of those men. I think of that moment too, but I agree with what you said there.
And I'm glad you bring that up because that's such a, I hesitate to use the word cute, but it is just like such a wholesome example where this like woman comes in and she's kind of nervous to be around her husband, but then by the end of it, like the rest of the soldiers are calling her mom and things like that. Yeah, I think that's a very good example of them like restoring their humanity together. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna ask a follow-up, what about this person question as well, because you also talk about Kat's leadership style, that his, I guess, well, maybe I'll start with asking you kind of a priming question of what's that main distinction between Kat's leadership style versus the other leaders that Paul experiences that helps him so much through this war?
Yeah, sacrifice. I think it really is sacrifice. Cantoric, there's like a quote that, he led us, he like pushed us to join the war, but in a way that cost him nothing. And like Cantoric is kind of delusional about what the war really entails. He thinks that it's this grand like arena for bravado and all like glorious things, patriotism, nationalism, whatnot, but he like pushes that in a way that doesn't force him to sacrifice anything. He's a teacher, and so he's telling the young boys to enlist, but he's not doing anything himself. Same for Himmelstas at like the bayonet practice. He like kind of fights Paul, but his weapon is like far superior than Paul's, so he's not even fighting him in a fair way. He's not sacrificing anything. He's not putting any like skin in the game to actually beat Paul. But Kat, he sacrifices so much, right? He sacrifices his time, his energy, the resources. He not sacrifices, but like he provides so much information, so much guidance that the other men do not.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. And so while I'm reading that part of your paper, the back of my mind is going, but what about? And they had another commander Bertink was his name, the man who kind of crawls up on the ridge and shoots one of the flamethrowers, or one of the men on the, I think it was a Frenchman, with a flamethrower and sacrifices himself in that moment. He exposes himself, and Paul even calls him, he's like one of our greater commanders that we had. So what's so different about this commander who does sacrifice versus Hemostats and all those other ones compared to Kat? There's something different about the relationship that Kat has with Paul that influences that leadership quality on Paul. So I guess, can you tease apart those two characters, because they seem to both sacrifice for Paul? Why is one so much more influential over the other?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just like the proximity of the sacrifice that Kat sacrifices, maybe in a smaller way, right? That he never like jumps in front of a bullet for Paul, but he provides food, he provides like all that guidance in a smaller but in a daily way. And I think that just the time aspect is a huge factor. That he's been there from the beginning and then sees Paul through the end. But yeah, Bertink is an interesting example, and I think that the sacrifice of both of them is apparent, but that the proximity is really the differentiating factor.
Yeah, that's great. I'll just check on my time. I think I have time for just one more.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I gotta choose wisely here. Okay, this is gonna be more of a speculative question, so feel free to elaborate as much as you want or as little, but a nagging question I had here is, Kat's death is the last one in the line of so many friends that Paul loses. Do you think that it would have had as big of an impact on Paul if he was not the last friend to die? Is it crucial that Kat was that last one in the order?
Yes, because Kat's death marks the dissolution of camaraderie, and I think of Kat really as like a symbol. Like he's a symbol of so many things. He's the symbol of the opposite of war, and that this sounds like kind of like foo-foo, but he's like camaraderie embodied. And so I think even if he died before, like it would have been horrifying, Paul would have lost a part of himself, all that. But the fact that it sets off this like chain reaction, because when the camaraderie vanishes, Paul loses purpose. When Paul loses purpose, he wants to die. And that's what makes it like so important, is that he was the last one out of the 8.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Bhatia. I'll turn my time over now to the students.
All right, thanks, Mrs. Cindy. And thanks, Ms. Bhatia. I've had so many questions here. I'm trying to figure out which ones to ask. Maybe I'll start with sort of a bigger, broader question. You mentioned in your speech that idea of tension and the fundamental tension of appearances and reality, right? And, every great work of literature teaches us how to see, right? Seeing the reality through the appearances. And so, again, this big question, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. What is the way of seeing that you think this book teaches? Are there appearances that we have to see past? Can we be misled? For example, do the men in the war appear to be animals, but in reality they're truly human, or maybe do they only appear to be human and in reality they're animals? Does war appear to be dehumanizing, or is it actually dehumanizing? And then maybe another kind of angle to take is, does the book offer the example of the good reader, the one who sees, the one who gets it, who sees truly in the book? Are there people who get it and people who don't get it? And how do you see truly? That's a big question. What do you think?
That's pretty loaded.
Yeah.
Yeah, big question. I think like the biggest sight or lack of sight is Remarque's. I think this is supposed to be an anti-war novel. I think that he wrote this book at a time where war was thought to be something that it is not. And so he assumes that the reader likes war, and I think he goes in saying, I want to crush that idea. I want to show the reader that the war is terrible, that there's no good that comes out of it. Let's throw patriotism out of the window. And I think that's the biggest, like, make sure you're seeing correctly, because in this book, like, Kantorek is just the best example, and his mother, his father, all of the people he sees when he's on leave, we're a part of that group, right? Most of the people that read this book are the civilians, and he has such resentment towards the civilians. He says that, oh, when they talk to us, it's like they're treating us like an icon, but when they don't talk to us, they're proud of their silence. Like, you can't do anything right, you know. And so I think that the biggest, like, seeing, not seeing is you have to see the bad in war, make sure you're not seeing the good. I think that's what Remarque wants us to make note of.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, we're the civilians who, I think you're right, they just don't get it, right? But now the interesting thing about the book is, you know, we're civilians, but we are with these men here, and we feel like one of them almost. And we too are maybe crushed by the reality, just the harsh reality of war, in the way they are. Is that yeah, okay, say
I was with you until that last sentence.
Okay,
What do you mean?
Yeah, you know, Paul, when he entered the war, maybe had some ideas about what it was, but quickly found out, oh, this is something different. And we too, in accompanying him in the war, I mean, it's a hard book to read. We almost suffer violence too in reading. Do you see that happening, or?
I still don't think I really understand what you mean when you say, like, suffer violence while reading, because yeah, the descriptions are gripping, and like, we do really get. I think this is the closest I've gotten to understanding what war is like, but reading it, I think that I can't even understand that sort of violence, that sort of, like, crushingness. I don't feel like I'm being crushed with them.
Right, yeah, we've got a safe
Yeah.
distance from it, yeah.
And it's almost a little, sometimes I feel a little ridiculous talking about it, like speaking as if I know, like, what the war was like, because I don't. I'm so far from it. Like, I'm a 17-year-old girl in Irving, Texas. Like, I don't know what World War I was like, and so I don't think it's really that fair to say that we feel a similar violence as theirs, because we don't. Like, I don't want to die. I haven't lost purpose. I'm chilling.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess, I love your indignance there because I think that's justified. We shouldn't say we experienced it.
Yeah.
But, you know, in some way, we lost Cat too, when he died, you know, but not to the same extent.
Not at all.
Well, good. So you say that, I want to kind of focus on the people outside of the war, the civilians and also the commanders and people who aren't faced with this harsh reality. And you had a great line on page 8 of your paper. You said these men are, quote, or quoting you, deluded by the supposed glory of war, which I think would be the wrong way of seeing, right? This supposed glory of war. But I guess my question is war not glorious? There's something definitely horrible about it, and they're definitely, you know, the people who are deluded, they're wrong, right? But if war is not glorious, why do I feel such admiration for Paul and Kat and their comrades? Is there some kind of true glory of war? Is there something great about what they did? So yeah, what's the false glory of war? What's the true glory of war, if there is such a thing?
What's the false glory of war and what's the true glory of war? Okay. So the false glory of war, right, is a lot of what has already been described, like the expectation that almost that for the civilians not understanding the sacrifice that the men make, I think is some of that false glory, that they realize that these men are putting their life on the line, but they don't understand like the after effects and in the grand scheme how horrible it is. But I think the true glory of war is the like esprit de corps, right? The camaraderie that comes through the war is what makes it glorious. That even though Dietering, I think it might have not been Dietering, I think it's one of the soldiers had gone mad and tries to leave. The other soldiers go out on the front and carry him back and get wounded, and that's where like the glory comes from, that sacrifice, that brotherhood. That's what makes these men so admirable, not the fact that they're necessarily fighting for their country. That's what Remark says. All right, when the men have the conversation, what is war good for? It's like, war happens because leaders want their names to be remembered in the history textbooks. That's what the conclusion seemed like. And so it's not for like the country, it's not for the civilians that they fight so gloriously, it's for each other.
That's great. I love that answer. So there is a glory of like achievement, right, and all this stuff, right? We're gonna win, we'll be remembered, but the real glory is just the relationships between the people there, right? Love, like you said in your speech, right? And perhaps we're closer to understanding what that is. Great. Let's see. Oh boy, I don't have much time. Just want to give the audience a chance. Okay. This is maybe kind of a more practical question about your argument. So you say that Cat is the source of Paul's humanity in some way. If Cat's there, Paul has his humanity. When Cat's gone, he loses it, right? and it's Kat being this kind of mother, father, brother, sister, lover for Paul, right? So Kat is able to provide that for Paul and protects him from the horrors of war and gives him meaning in his life. I guess my question is, how did Kat get that? Did he have another Kat in his life who was helping him have his humanity so he can help Paul? Or did he just have it himself, in himself? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I know I think that's been like my biggest unanswered question as I was like reading through this again. Like, why Kat? Like, how is he so strong of a figure? And I think the closest I came to an answer is that like, he's older than the men. He's around 40 and he's had the chance to establish a life prior. Like he's had the chance to like love, be loved, and I think that's what makes him different than Paul. And Paul is especially vulnerable because he's in that liminal stage. But Kat, with all his wisdom, can provide that support. But I don't think that's that satisfying of an answer, to be honest. Like, because he's old, like he has it. But I think it's the closest I came to one.
Interesting. So he's got like a foot on solid ground.
Yeah,
before
exactly.
the war, whereas these young men are floating free. Okay. Well, oh no. I wanted to ask about the ending, but I'm afraid I am out of time. Although I'm in charge here, so maybe I can just. No, I'll turn it over to the audience. Thanks for your answers, Ms. Bhatia. Okay. Questions from the audience? Ms. Bhatia, you can call on raised hands. So if you have a question, raise your hand.
John.
Mr. Mooney's question initially about what your idea of humanity gave me this idea, and you answered that partially it's the emotion, like losing your emotions is a part of like losing your humanity, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like the way Kat and Paul's relationship is very emotional, right? So can that relationship be less emotional, and then therefore, if he is to lose Kat, would he be able to retain his humanity? He's not losing.
I don't think I follow. So you're saying that Kat and Paul's relationship is emotional, right? But then you asked, what did you ask?
I asked if their relationship was less emotional, would he then be able to retain his humanity even after Kat was to die?
I understand. No. I think to say that Kat is Paul's family, like the basis of that is like an emotional connection. You have an emotional connection with your like mother, father, brother, lover, like all of them, and that's how he opposes war. And so no, if Kat and Paul's relationship was not emotional, then Kat wouldn't have mattered as much. Like his death would have been fine. Does that answer the question? Miss Girl.
So, I know, so your argument is that Kat is the one who enables Paul to retain his humanity, and when Paul is separated, Paul no longer has that humanity. And that makes a lot of sense, but I was just thinking, there are times in the story where Kat isn't dead, but Kat and Paul are separated. Like when, for example, when Paul is in the hospital with Albert, he's not with Kat for a long time. And when Paul is guarding the Russians, he's not with Kat for a long time. But yet he's still hopeful, he's not hopeless, he's not depressed. So is it just like the knowledge that Kat is alive that gives him that hope? It doesn't, it seems like there's something more, so what there in those instances allows him to still remain?
Yeah, I think you're completely correct that Paul doesn't physically need Kat like at his side at all times, but I think of Kat as like a symbol. He's like a symbol of the ideal brother. He's a symbol of camaraderie. And when I say that when Kat like ceases to exist, when Kat is no longer with Paul, like Miss Ostindi asked earlier, a huge part of that is when Kat dies, there are no other comrades left. And I think Remark was intentional with Kat's death being the last, because it really does symbolize just like the dissolution of camaraderie. There's no one left to understand him. So like that is true that he doesn't need Kat aside or alongside him the whole time, but Kat serving as this symbol, he needs that continuously.
I wanted to speak to the end of the book a little bit.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Oh, thank you, Benjamin.
Yeah, I wanted just the very last, well, not last couple of words, but the last paragraph I have. It says Paul dies with a smile, right? And I wanted to ask you why you think that is. Why, if it was out of happiness, why was he happy? And I know you spoke a little bit about it earlier, saying that he didn't really have anything left to live for. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think it's like best understood reading a line prior. He says, "Let the months and years come, they can take nothing from me, they can take nothing more. I am so alone and so without hope that I can confront them without fear." He is alone, he is without hope. And I think that if I were to re-answer the question about like what is humanity, I think to be human, you have to hope. You have to hope that tomorrow is going to be better, or that eventually things will get better, because if you're living without that hope, then you're not really living. And so Paul losing that hope, Paul losing that sense of purpose, right? We established earlier that Paul's purpose is camaraderie. Before his death, that vanishes. So because Paul has no purpose, because Paul has no hope, he's ready for the end to come. Like he wants the end to come. And so he dies with a smile.
Great. Take a couple more.
Send your satchel.
Thank you. Through the years here in the school, here in Grey Hearts, we have learned to read, to understand books, right? That happened to me. I relearned to read. And I have been passing this to my students through the years that I have in here. So you know that when we are reading a book, we refer to our base, to our virtues, to our what is our classical education is. So based on this, Ms. Bhatia, I found really interesting the two words that you are using in your title, humanity and heroism. In base of what we have learned and grow during Grey Hearts, how do you refer one to the other one?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So humanity and heroism, like how are they related? Yeah. You look like you want to say something.
You know, it says a quiet heroism.
Uh-huh.
Heroism should be quiet.
Yes.
If not,
Yeah.
in my idea, it should be quiet. You are doing this by heart, correct? So, how do you refer the humanity to the quiet heroism in this case? I am not asking you to refer to the book, but to yourself.
Yeah. Humanity and quiet heroism. So we talk a lot about, especially this year, about what the purpose of life is, you know, how to lead a good life, and how you make it to paradiso, right? How do you get up there? And I think that a big part of it is doing like the work that you need to do without expecting the result. Like you put in the kindness, you put in the hours, but you don't care about, or it's not that you don't care about the result, it's that the result isn't why you're doing it. Like with this book, Kat says, they know that it's very likely that they will die, that no soldier outlives his 1,000 chances, but Kat continues to sacrifice. He continues to serve his men, knowing that tomorrow I could die. And I think the knowledge that, okay, the men that I'm serving could die the next day, I can die the next day, it seems like, it should make it meaningless, but it doesn't. I think it makes it more impressive, because it shows that to really be like a quiet hero, you're not caring about the effect, or you're not doing good for any end goal, you're just doing good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. We've got time for one more question.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh my goodness, this is hard.
In the choice, you gotta go with family, or family or friends. Yeah, I see.
So, not having read the book,
Yes.
this is more of a broader question. What is something in this book that you did not, a part that you did not like or you did not agree to, if at all, something, and why?
I didn't like the fact that Remark didn't mention God. The whole time, so in our curriculum this year, we read a lot of religious, we read the Bible, we read St. Augustine's Confessions, we read Dante, Brothers K. And the whole time I was reading this, I was like, Paul, if you want to be saved, you need to find God. Paul, if you want to be saved, you need to find God. Because in an environment that is just so horrible, that is so destructive, there's only one thing that's like everlasting. There's only one thing that is infallible, and like that is God. You know, even though Kat is like this amazing figure, he symbolizes camaraderie and so much good, you can't base your self-worth on one person, because literally that person can die. And I think that it points us, or I really wish Remark got Paul to find God, so that Paul can be saved, and so that Paul can hold on to his purpose, and so that he doesn't like want to die, but Remark doesn't.
Great. Thanks for that question, and thanks for the answer. Now I'm thinking like, wow, I wasn't quite thinking in that frame, but maybe Paul is like kind of like a Job figure, but without God. I know everything's taken. So I don't know. Food for further thought, maybe. Well, thank you all for your questions, and thanks especially to our panelists here and to Mr. Turner. Thanks for all your work this year advising. And of course, special thanks to Ms. Bhatia. Thank you for all your hard work on this book this year. Let's give them a